Hello, friend. The Mystical American Patriots Society is transmitting to you from beneath 4 million cubic feet of solid granite, in the burning heart of the Yellowstone caldera. This is a variety program for normal sandwich-eating Americans with some concerns about living in a deranged, post-Christian technocracy. So, keep your third eye on the sky and your ear to the ground, as Sumo and Smokestack connect your main brain vein to a higher plane. Are you ready? Stand by.
Now begins the ritualistic bashing of science. Good morning.
Good morning. I wish I had a little gong I could ring right now, but I don't.
We'll edit it in post.
Okay, I'll put it in the gong now.
Post. Bing, like, right, bing.
Mm-hmm.
NBCnews.com confirming what we have talked about before recently. They said they ran an article this week. Said, quote, headline, maybe dark matter doesn't exist after all.
I knew it.
To which I was like, of course it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. And the first paragraph is, for decades, astronomers and cosmologists have theorized the universe is filled with an exotic material called dark matter that explains stranger gravitational behaviors, right? But so our whole understanding, dark matter was just made up. It was a pretend. And it's been a pretend for 50 years. All that happened was they have a formula of gravity, and when you look at how galaxies spin round and round and round and round, it doesn't account for why they don't spin off into and obliterate. Because they spin really fast, you know, and if something spins fast, it has a tendency to come apart, unless there's a force holding it together. But gravity's so weak, they were like, well, it can't be gravity unless there's a lot more mass there that we can't see. So then they just whole cloth, poof out of nothing, said, oh, there must be a pretend, invisible, exotic kind of matter that permeates all the galaxies. And in the article, they talk about how it makes up 85% of the universe. So in cosmology, the official narrative for 50 years has been that 85% of the universe is this thing that's never been observed.
Which is ridiculous.
Yeah, never in any capacity. It's never been observed in any, not even like that. It just was a hole in their formula. And rather than be like, oh, we have a wrong formula to fit the observation, let's change the formulas. They were like, no, let's keep the formulas and just add an additional 85% of the universe.
I have a friend who's an astrophysicist at church, and I'm going to dunk on him so hard with this. Yeah,
see, because, and so what they would say was like, well, and people try to get out of this nonsense by saying, well, all dark matter means is it's matter you can't see because it's not illuminated, right? Like, if you look at distant stars, you mostly just see the star because the planets are so dim, they're dark, right? They're cold. They're not, you see the stars. But the problem is that even if every star in the universe had as many planets as we do, or significantly more, the mass of the star just outweighs the mass of the combined planets to the point where it's a rounding error. So you're really talking about a rounding error amid all these stars, and that's what and then you're saying, okay, well that can't account for it. So there must be this extra matter that's just sort of permeating the whole thing. And there was never one drop of observed evidence for this, ever.
Well, we've got the Voyager probes out there, way the heck out there by now, and you'd think maybe one of them would bump into some dark matter, but...
Yeah, I think that sort of stuff is... is beginning to erode it. Like, well, where is all the dark matter?
Right.
And but there was never
a bunch of people that think they're smarter than they really are decided that they're not satisfied, thinking that, well, God holds the universe together. And that wasn't good enough for them.
Or that it's on a turtle's back, which is also acceptable. But
it's kind of the same thing, right?
But I was just, it's just this the continual tendency to reject observed reality in favor of the theoretical model, and then to invent imaginary things to make the model work rather than change the model. As you see this over and over again. And we're trying to say, Maps here is trying to save science. We want to help science because we love science.
Indeed.
But we don't like science trademark TM.
But if you find yourself more married to the model than you are to the observations of your senses and the senses of all humankind throughout history, maybe you've taken a wrong turn somewhere.
Yes. Right. And this is good, by the way. Maybe them finally dropping dark matter because the scientists that made their careers on it are dying, which is all this is. Whenever you see a revolution in science, like, oh, maybe this thing we've been telling you for 50 years isn't real, it's always because the generation that was 20 when they did their PhD dissertation, and they came up with this fancy thing that got them all these, credit, all this lauding and like, oh, nice positions. He came up with dark matter. Isn't that a cool thing? That means that now he's 70 and he's retiring and he's going away. And so then the next group of people is coming in and saying, oh, his idea was stupid. Listen to my new idea. And because they replace it in the article with a new idea, it's like, oh, this other effect of gravity that I came up with. See, and then that'll be the thing that they run with for 50 years. And will that have evidence to it? Maybe. Will it not? Maybe. It's really hard, actually, as it turns out, to get a lot of first-hand evidence of space.
Yeah.
Without going. This is like, did you see my toot this week?
Your toot?
Ragging on that. Yeah, my toot about the lady talking about the core of Jupiter.
Yeah. Yeah, I did see that. Well, tell the people.
Like, yeah, there was this toot by some pretend science woman, and she said Jupiter's magnetic core is made of liquid metallic hydrogen created by oxygen atoms sharing electrons. All right, that's the science bit. And then for some reason, she adds on, what are you even doing with your life, you piece of shit? I don't see how the second follows the first.
Oh.
Like, if Jupiter is, the fact that Jupiter is made of liquid metallic hydrogen somehow invalidates your decision to go hiking or something.
Right.
But it does.
I woke up this morning and I asked myself, why aren't I a planet?
Right.
And I was really sad.
I said there's literally no way to know what Jupiter's core is made of. This is more #fake space. We aren't even sure what's going on in the Earth's core. Like, they make all these big diagrams and they put them in kids' textbooks and they're like, here's all the layers, and we've drilled down. You know how many miles have we drilled down? Can you guess?
No, not more than a couple. I mean,
5.
5. Okay, there you go.
There's a hole in Russia that's 5 miles deep, and it's about as big around as like a drill head, because all they've done is they just drilled straight just for the purpose of going down to see how deep they could. And 5 miles is it, and that's 0.1% of the whole radius of the Earth. So we've actually had direct observation and measurement of one spot of 0.1% down. So all of the idea of what's at the center of the Earth is theoretical. I think it's probably a good theory, right? It's okay.
Yeah.
But we don't know.
But let's not all talk about it like we know what we're talking about.
Right. We don't know. And the idea that we know about Jupiter is even to that level is even more absurd. Like, here's the thing. Like, the model they tell you is like, all they have to go on is 2 things. Deep enough, it gets hot, which is why we can't drill down very deep, because the drills start melting. right? So that's indicative that it's probably hotter the deeper you go. Fine. And then they say, and we have a magnetic field around the planet, which protects us from radiation. And the only way they can come up with there being a magnetic field is if there's like ferromagnetic material like iron sort of rotating in the middle of the planet. Then that's it. That's why they think there's like this iron core of like molten iron spinning. It's not even molten anymore. It used to be molten. Now I think they're saying there's a molten outer layer, but then there's an inner layer of like a solid. So somehow it goes solid, liquid, solid again, even though it's getting hotter. I don't understand that. It's never been adequately explained to me. It's solid, liquid, solid again. And then the solid part in the very middle of the earth is as hot as the surface of the sun. That's the official model at the moment. And that could be, but we don't actually know, right? We've only been down, like I said, 0.1%. So the idea that we know like what's going on under the seas of Europa is just crazy talk.
Yeah.
And all we're arguing for here, my friends, is more like humility. Because it's like Terence McKenna used to say, every civilization has thought they had things 95% figured out. And the next 5% was coming in the next couple of years of research. Like the Mayans thought that. The Mayans accounted for everything. Everything was like, oh, it's Quetzalcoatl up there running around or whatever.
Well, it's a good position to be in when you're applying for research grants, you know. It's just it's the last 5%, taxpayers. We're almost there.
That last 5%.
Utopia's right around the corner.
Right around the corner. And that's my biggest like of Terence McKenna is he would say, you know, you have people today and they're like religious or they're scientific, and you have people that are like, well, the liberal position is, well, everyone knows something, you know, the Catholics have something and the Hindus knows a little bit, and science is this and the mystics are that, and everyone's just a blind man taking a different part of the other, right?
Hi gang, it's Smokestack patching in from the production room to tell you that if you would like to donate to Sumo's Internet Connection Enhancement Fund, you can donate at buymeacoffee.com/maps.
But I wish I could do his voice. But he'd be like, but I was getting a different message from the mushroom. The mushroom was telling me that nobody knows anything. And I always appreciated that because that's a good tactic to have. Like he was because there's always needs to be a certain percentage of people going, really?
He loses me at the psychedelics though.
Well, I know, but they can be a good. I think that we'll have a show on psychedelics at some point.
Okay.
Because I'm not sure why the whole idea. Well, not the idea. The fact that there are plants and mushrooms with basically neurotransmitters inside of them is a very interesting fact. Like there are mushrooms that have neurotransmitters in them that then rewire your brain temporarily. Very interesting.
It's not very Presbyterian.
It's not very Presbyterian.
You're gonna have me in mega skeptical mode.
I know, but and it would be more difficult today because we have 2 Presbyterians on.
You're outnumbered.
I'm outnumbered by 2 Presbyterians, Presbyterianism is Scottish, right? It's come from Scotland, mainly?
Sort of, yes.
Sort of, like that's where the Presby people.
I bet our guest can answer that question much better than I can.
Yeah, and so I have 2 kilted people here, and they're going to attack each other, me and feminism, and our guest is Zachary. Zach Garris.
Zachy.
Hello, Zach.
Hey, how you doing?
We're good. Thank you for coming.
Indeed, thank you.
Thanks for having me. Yes, I am a Presbyterian. Glad to be here.
Was I correct about it being Scottish?
Yeah, it's the church itself has its origins in Scotland. I mean, its theology goes further back to Calvin and the Reformation, but
right.
Yeah, the Presbyterian Church itself is Scottish in origin.
Now, was that did they start in part just to get away from how annoying the Anglicans are? Was that because that's totally valid.
Yeah, I think I mean there are definitely political issues there, but interestingly, the Confession of Faith that the Presbyterians use, the Westminster Standards, Westminster Confession and Catechisms, they're actually drafted by the British Parliament. So there's some interesting history there. But the British ended up, or the English, I should say, ended up not using the Westminster Confession, and the Scottish did. So strange history.
Yeah, I like reading about the English Reformation. It's very interesting. There's this one. I have a book somewhere that talked about various like local parish reactions to them changing the Book of Common Prayer at one point. And there was one congregation where the preacher had to stand giving the sermon from the new book with pistols pointed at the congregation because they were so upset.
I've heard about that. I can't remember his name, but yeah,
I always love that
amazing.
image. Like, you're gonna listen to the new book. Imagine people being that into, like, people think they are upset about Vatican II, but they've never had to have it read to them under gunpoint. So are they really? See what I'm saying?
Well, not yet.
Anyway, Zach, not yet.
Yeah.
But anyway, Zach has written a book, and I saw parts of his book and his ethos on Twitter, and I decided they would be a good guest for the show. I think he and Smokes probably heavily aligned in many places. And his book is called Masculine Christianity. And what I've read of it so far, I haven't gotten through it the whole thing, is very good. And I think it also is very, it attacks, it goes further back historically in its attacks and critiques of what's wrong with the world today than most people are willing to do. For instance, like when you read it, you get to the first chapter, he's like, a lot of these problems come from women voting, which is not correct, but let's talk about that. So like, what do you like? Why do you, Zach? What are these problems with women? Well, I guess just what's the problem with feminism? That'd be the good idea. And I'm not attacking.
Yeah.
Believe we've said much worse on this show.
Sure. Yeah, the problem with feminism is that it's a distortion of God's design for men and women, particularly when it comes to the home and, you know, the duties of husband and wife and child rearing and these kind of things. And so feminism is really anti-family, anti-motherhood. It's trying to push women to act like men. And so that goes back, I don't just trace it back to the 1960s with the sexual revolution, but I go further back and say, actually, there's this first wave feminism in the 1800s, and everybody thinks it's great because, you know, women got the right to vote, but there was actually a lot of other things going on, and it really was an anti-marriage, at least anti-male headship ideology, and so it undermined, the entire thing. And so I think you can trace a line from first wave feminism all the way to second wave feminism, and even to today. So,
well, I liked you were talking about when you go from, because the idea used to be that every family would have a vote, and then you go from that to every individual needs a vote. And so that really, people talk about the atomization of our society and how everyone breaks apart. And then you trace it back to, like, well, it's this central idea that the fundamental unit of society is the individual rather than the family. And then that is why that was a justification for women needing to vote. But then once you do that, then you're like, well, then the family unit is not the main structure of society anymore. And then the atomization follows as a natural course, which I thought was a good insight.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it is, just this overemphasis today on the individual. Christian thought does not neglect the individual. I mean, it certainly, views the individual as having responsibility, whether it's a man or woman. But, the central unit in society ought to be the family. And you see that in the Bible, and even in prior history, is the family had a much higher place. But I should also add, not every family used to get to vote. Not every man. So even in the American system, is very anti-democratic. I know we like to use that word today, democracy, but the founders were very concerned about limiting democracy, and so they set up a representative system, and that meant not even every man got to vote. So it was actually much more limited. Property owners, you had to be free. Obviously, you couldn't be a slave. And so there's a lot more there. We had a very limited voting system. And I think we've just seen the expansion, with universal suffrage to in our modern day.
Yeah, they were it's weird how the founding fathers get like bandied about between being like racist white national slave owners, but also proto-universal globalists, like depending on the day. It's like, oh, this is how they wanted it, and they were for freedom and justice for all, and then also they were Nazis, right? And it's just like whatever is convenient for the day is what they spiel, and but they really did not like democracy. They hated it almost as much as they hated the idea of monarchy, maybe more. Like when you read what they were talking about and what they were trying to set up, they were very much like the mobs are crazy. The mass of people is insane and easily manipulated, which is turning out to be true.
Indeed.
They can be driven into any direction that someone with a microphone wants them to be. So the idea that everyone should vote is also something that needs to be revisited. Maybe only MAPS members should vote. Maybe, I don't know what the criteria would be, because land ownership today, like what would be the criteria today? Like, not that this is in any way feasible until after the great collapse and America is no more and we rebuild something new. But
well, I think something that could easily be implemented is you can't vote if you're taking more money from the government than you're putting in.
Here.
So that would be kind of comparable to land ownership. I mean, you could also have an ownership, land requirement, but yeah, we have a lot of people today voting that are takers, and I think that's the big problem, is they're just voting themselves other people's money.
Well, I like the idea of land ownership equaling a right to vote, because it introduces an idea of scarcity back into the system, where you can have an unlimited number of people with meeting certain criteria, but you can only have a certain number of landowners. And I think maybe it should be scarce, because it puts a kind of a natural limiting on democracy. And a lot of things like feminism, I don't know, Zach, if you agree with this take, but I think I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. But I think feminism and all the other isms, all the other social justice positions in the oppression Olympics or whatever, they all take their root in the foundation of democracy being sort of the base operating system of society.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think, the rise in democracy, coincided with all of this, these isms, as you said, these different ideologies. Oh. And because I think part of it is you're playing towards different people groups. If everybody's voting, and it's more direct, in some ways. I mean, we got rid of, senators being appointed by state legislatures, so now we even vote for them. So there's all these democratic elements that have been added, and so people and politicians are trying to cater to individual groups.
Yep.
So you've got to cater to women, even though they're half the population. And then now you've got all these minority groups, whether it's homosexuals or transgenders or whatever, and then they're like, well, we're too small, separate, so let's actually come together and form this separate group of our own. And so it's just created this messy situation.
And I think the idea of having skin in the game is important, and that's one reason the founding fathers were into the land ownership idea, is because, okay, the people that have the most to lose in the mismanagement of society should have the biggest say in it. because they've got skin in the game, and now there's no, everybody gets a vote and nobody has to have any responsibility to it.
Well, yeah, and also having the vote was contingent upon you or someone that you were like was one of your dependents going. Like if you were not expected to be in the military if you couldn't vote, right? Like you didn't have to fight the war.
Right? Yeah, that's like, something I mentioned. I mentioned in there. There was in the book there was an argument. This wasn't that long ago. This was like 1906, I think, was the article on the was it the Atlantic? I think it was something like that. And the author, one of the points he made, he was arguing against women voting, is that women don't go to war, and so men go to war, and so why are the women voting on this? It should be the men's decision. They're the ones who are invested here. So I guess the idea would be the women probably wouldn't want their men to go to war, but ironically, it seems like it's turned out to work out the other way in American history. We ended up going into more wars.
Yeah, funny that.
More wars.
Yeah.
And we because when you don't have to fight it, you're probably much more likely to vote for it. Like imagine you have half of the population, which is the case for most of the 20th century, able to vote on whether or not you go to war, but they will not personally be involved.
It's still that way. It's still that way. Well, yeah, women aren't required to sign up for the draft. So yeah,
that's true. But they do try to shoehorn them into the military every other second.
Right.
Which I guess is natural because, once you're voting, then you have to be in the. I guess it must follow, that you have women in the military after you give. But it took a while. But yeah, you don't have to sign up for the draft, and yet you can vote on whether or not we get to bomb Iran, right? And that's seems a bit like you don't have skin in the game, like Smokestack was saying.
Yeah, no.
So we have to draft women.
That's where we are going, unfortunately. I mean, I don't know why women would support such a move, but if you are, hell-bent on equality, then I guess that's what we should implement.
Well, women are easily emotionally manipulated. I mean, I'm sorry, ladies, it's just true. If they get on the TV and they cry, the mass of women will be swayed to vote a certain way.
It's
and
true.
And women also here. I'm going to attack women for a bit. We attack science, now let's attack women.
We're going for blood today.
Women don't know anything. It's a big problem.
Man.
I did this test myself once. I was arguing about women voting like years ago at some party because I like to be fun at the party. And we were talking, and they were like, and then I took up the position, obviously, in part just to be contrary, because there's nothing to discuss if we all agree, right? So I was like, well, should they vote? And people were like, blah, blah, blah. And then I said, I got out a map, and it didn't have any labels on it. And I said, point to Iraq. And like most of the men could do it, and there was like one lady out of the whole group that could find Iraq.
Bam.
And I was like, so you don't even know. We've been at war with this place for like 20 years, and you don't even know where it is. And then why are you voting? And then I'd be like, what is NAFTA? And it's like, the women are like, what? What? And then a lot of the men could tell me what NAFTA was. The women just don't. Women find politics boring, and they should. That's why they have to do all these, because it is boring, and women don't. I mean, statecraft is boring, and women would rather talk about their hair, and that's why we have a lot of female politicians now who make weird political connections between themselves and the texture of their hair.
I mean, AOC doesn't seem to know any more about politics and statecraft than any of the women at the party that you talked about. I mean, this is why they have to make it so dramatic now. Like when they were impeaching Trump, they're like, now we walk the articles of impeachment,
down the hall together and solemnly bow. And they have to make it into a soap opera because that's the only way to get women to care, is if it's like there's a soap opera and who's sleeping with who. I mean, Me Too was largely just a reason to make women tune into the news.
I mean, there is a sense in which, yeah, most women aren't that interested in politics. I mean, it's not really it shouldn't be a controversial thing. It's just, you know, my wife, my mother, you know, my family members, like they keep a surface level interest because, well, it's unfortunately politics is kind of in your face today. So you have, you know, it has some application with, you know, even just the presidential election. But yeah, most women, I mean, it's probably true of most men too, but more men are interested in politics and economics and policies and these kind of things. So it's just a fact, I think.
It's innate to our nature as created. I've got an example of this. I don't think my wife would mind me sharing too much. I think maybe she's kind of proud of it. Is when election day comes around, she says, "Will you just print out a sample ballot and fill it out for me and tell me who to vote for?" And I say, "Sure, honey." And that's what I do. And she takes it in and she votes. So I get 2 votes. And she wants it that way and I want it that way. And it works great.
So maybe what we do is maybe the path to political success is we all adopt Mormonism, get many wives, and we all have many votes. No? Is this not practical?
It worked for Utah for a little while.
Maybe. Well, they're still giving us Mitt Romney. I mean, something's not right over there. I don't think Mormonism is the political solution here.
It's also deeply unattractive when a woman cares about politics. It's like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
That's like the women version of being autistic. Is if she cares about politics. Like, why don't you care about like things that a lady should care about? That is, you know, that I don't know. Spore probably doesn't like this show.
Spore doesn't like Spore. We're hosted on the Alternate Current Radio Network. Hesher and Spore proprietors. And I think Spore does like our show. She's always very sweet to me whenever I come on Boiler Room over there.
Okay. Spore is actually knows about politics, but she's like she's one of the, like, there's always the exception.
Yeah.
Right. And there are women that care about politics, but in general, they don't. Like, and if you go to a party and there's a lady that's really concerned about Biden or Trump, that lady needs to be on medication. And most often they are.
Yeah.
That's the weird thing about it. Most often they are. But yeah, it's women. That's the takeaway from the women don't know anything, and why are they voting? Well, they have to
I want to add this point. So if we go off this fact that, you know, most women aren't that interested in politics, and yet many of them are still voting, you know, we have to ask, well, what's going on here? And I do think there's a sense in which our politics have become, you know, effeminate, and, you know, the things they cater to. And, you know, even when we look at the media, how does all of this work? I mean, it's totally emotionally driven, and we're not seeing logical decisions. And, you know, I think it's just kind of it's part of the reason, you know, some of these crazy policies get endorsed, or crazy candidates, you know, because there's this emotive reaction to, you know, Donald Trump or something.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's driving the politics, and it's driving it where we, you know, have these just madness now. I mean, look at the stuff the Biden administration's wanting to do. It's crazy. So I don't think you would get that with just men voting. And of course, you know, you can't say this, but we have already, so it's out there.
Yep, it's out there.
Well, and a counter argument is, well, but men vote to go to war more, and women, but it's like that was maybe a thing you could argue in like 1930. That's clearly not true.
No,
women, America went to war way more after women started voting than it ever did before.
And just constantly look at count the countries in the world that have universal suffrage and a robust feminist movement and lots of women involved in politics. They're the countries who, you know, league up in the UN or whatever and meddle militarily in the affairs of other nations. I mean, it's
because
that's
women like to meddle. This is like if you're I mean, think about it. In a suburb, the wives like to go around and they like to poke at each other for having their Christmas tree in the wrong window.
my wife doesn't do that.
Or whatever. I'm just saying in general, right? And they like to gossip and like, oh, your dog pooped in my yard. Imagine your dog pooped in my yard arguments with tanks.
Yeah.
And that's what it becomes when you have like a bunch of old ladies really concerned about politics. But instead of a dog, it's like, oh, you didn't give sufficient trans rights to this person in this Muslim country, so we're going to blow you up.
Saddam Hussein painted his house a different color without getting it approved by the HOA board first.
Yes, that's what the United Nations is, a big HOA. That's all it is. And the NATO, and then Russia is trying to be a little bit different and have a different roof color, and it's a big problem.
Okay, I want to take our conversations back to kind of family role issues for a second, because I got a question for Zach.
Sure.
So, Zach, maybe you share this opinion, but the roles of the family as created by God are needs that need to be filled in every human, but they've been, in our societies, have been obliterated by democracy and liberalism, and so now people are trying. I think part of the issue is people are trying to fill the roles in ways that they're not meant to be filled, and having family-like relationships with people that don't hold those offices in their life, such as a woman and her boss at work or whatever, or say like the government as a father figure. Or a God figure. Is that something you see playing out across our society as a result of some of these changes?
Absolutely. I think it's undeniable that when people are missing these natural relationships, fatherly figures, motherly figures, that they're looking for these things elsewhere. And so, yeah, I think probably the best example is the way people treat the government today. Is they want it to act like it's your father. So, and you're a child, and the government's supposed to provide for you and protect you. And the government does have a protection role, but not a provisionary role. That's not supposed to be happening. Mm-hmm. And yet everybody's looking to the government to pay out for something, whether it's healthcare or to help the poor or whatever. I mean, these were tasks originally or previously carried out by charity, churches, things like that. And so, yeah, people are looking to other things to find fatherly role.
So what
husbandly role, like it's their husband that takes care of them.
Yeah.
A lot of them are unmarried.
Right. Yeah, they're not married. Yeah, because your boss can be your if you're a teacher, your maybe your principal can be a husband-like figure to you. Or yeah, like
why would you marry a lady and then have her go work for another man and send your children off to be raised by other women in school? Right? It's like this whole weird thing. It doesn't make any sense. It's all backwards bananas.
So Zach, I'm looking at your website kind of as we're talking. Teachdiligently.com. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It's an education website.
There are some. I'm really gonna dig into this because we're a homeschool family, and so I love finding sites that have a lot of great resources in them like this. And so I was wondering if you could comment a little bit about home education, and then I don't know if you're specifically into a specific flavor like classical or whatever, but could you comment on the role of home education in restoring and repairing some of the damage that has been done to our society by feminism, etc.?
Yeah, I was actually a teacher at a Christian school for 2 years, mm-hmm. And I do think there's benefits to a Christian school if done well. I think it can be hard to find good private Christian schools today.
Agree.
And so I think, homeschooling is a great option for most people. And, I guess just to give maybe a quick thing, I would say that God has given parents the primary responsibility to educate their children. And that should include educating them in, his word, teaching them and raising children, to believe in God and to apply a Christian worldview to all subjects. So whether it's math or science or history or any of these things. And, that's not happening in the public schools right now. I know some people still send their kids there. I don't know why, but, so the public schools are teaching an anti-Christian worldview. They have been for a long time, and now it's getting even crazier. You're seeing the fruit of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, the best option today is homeschooling, and parents need to, consider that to, carry out their task, that God has given them, their duty towards their children.
Yeah, public schools aren't even teaching good secular stuff. Like they're teaching them science where they invent 85% of the universe and then throw it away a few decades later.
Yeah.
So it's not even good. The other stuff isn't even good anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing is like 10 years ago, they were claiming, public schools were claiming math and science, right? Because that was their thing, math and science. Yeah, we don't teach history, but we teach math and science. And now science. Now science is like, you mentioned this gray matter stuff. I haven't really looked into that, but yeah, it sounds just made up. And then, now it's, I guess science says if you put a piece of cloth over your face, that's going to prevent a virus, and which is ridiculous. I mean, the science actually doesn't say that, but
Indeed.
People think science says it anyway. And science says a man can, mutilate his body and call himself a woman. And, so that's science for you today.
It's entirely unscientific. I was having a conversation recently with someone about COVID, the COVID policies that our country has taken up. And I made the point that none of it has been scientifically proven out at all. Like none of it. And yet, if you object to it, the objector is asked to show, I need a double-blind, peer-reviewed study of a population of 10,000 people over the period of 6 years, proving out your objection to the policy, when the policy itself was never proven. It was they just made it up out of pretty much out of thin air, as far as social distancing and masks and all this stuff.
Well, a lot of that is because of credentialism, because most people today in positions in their jobs do not need to be there. They're not good at it. They're not smart. They just have a piece of paper. And so when you question the authority of people with pieces of paper, you're questioning if you question the credentialism that puts people in positions, you're questioning their reason for earning an income.
Yeah.
Because most people today in our society know that they are useless, right? And they try to obfuscate that and be like, "Oh, this is why some people are so quick to be like, I'm Dr. So-and-so, or I'm an expert," and meh. But it's like, what can you do? Nothing, right? They contribute. Like, we already figured out who is and isn't essential, and most of us aren't, and people are upset about that. And so they don't want to be replaced by robots or thrown into the street. So they need the credentialism. And it's just a self-defense mechanism at this point, I think.
You only really know who the intellectual heavy hitters are in your life is that years later you find out that they had a bunch of credentials that they never mentioned and you were never aware of. Those are the people doing the real work,
That's right. That's right. Like I could put in public life.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. I could put 6 letters after him if I wanted to.
I know you
never
could.
have.
Yeah.
Never have. I don't because I've walked the halls of science and seen that they're retards. Right? I know that they're not like most people. They don't like. There are people that are still smart in like physics, but a diminishing number. And in all the other fields of sciences, except for maybe chemistry, where there's still some smart people, you just walk in there and people are just, it's this catty culture of trying to one up each other and getting these committees and these boards. And I need to say the right thing so that I get the tenure. And I hope I get the, and they're all just people that are slightly above blue collar, you know, and then just sort of scrambling after $30,000 a year. It's just gross.
It is. It's wild. I'm sort of in the chemistry world, and it's amazing how many people I run into with lots of big credentials after their name, who in a given year do way less actual science than I do, having zero credentials or even education. Things. Or I don't even have an education.
Invented things.
And I'm thinking, this is upside down. This is completely upside down and backwards. And I don't want to harp on that, but people get real snooty about their credentials.
You cannot find the smart work and the smart discussion being done in universities anymore. That's why you can find a little bit of it on Twitter, although they're increasingly banning all the interesting people. That's why I had to get Zach on before he was banned.
Yep.
And so all the interesting. Okay, so anyway, let's get back to Masculine Christianity, the book. So, in what ways in the past, Zach, was Christianity more masculinized, other than this, obviously, feminism thing? What was it? How was it more so in the past? Like, what would if you took a Christian man from say 1437, and you brought him to today, how would he feel?
Well, I think he would, like some of the technological advancements, but I think he probably wouldn't know what to do with them. Life was much harder back then, and I think that's part of it. I think, some of the advancements we have today can make people soft. I sometimes think that when people get offended, over just small things, and I think, man, like, what has to happen in your life for you to find that offensive? I think that's like a big deal. And it has to be that everything is just easy in your life. And, that you haven't endured that much pain or challenges, or at least not on a daily basis. And life was much harder back then. And I think that's why you have people like Martin Luther, or even John Calvin, or some of these earlier theologians, and you read the way they speak, and they don't sound like modern softies. These were hard men in a sense. They, and they would even, attack each other with words, and, they could endure a good, nice debate, polemics and things like that. They could insult one another. Nobody's going to get too offended. And, it's just a different culture. But as far as, how did things look differently? I mean, people just understood. It was just obvious that, a mother or a woman's body is designed to bear children, to nurse children. And so that was going to be her focus, at least while she's younger. And then the man doesn't bear children, and his body is designed to work. And so he's going to have to be the one that works in the field or works a job to bring in income. And, I think these are just obvious things, but they've been abandoned in, the modern age.
Well, I think you're touching on an important idea of modern lifestyle, of humans living in almost a laboratory environment, completely disconnected from the created order of the world. And our masculine and feminine natures are isolated from the things upon which they would naturally be expressed in what would have been daily life for most of humanity. And we go and sit in front of computers all day, and our kids go now to school and sit in front of computers all day, and there's no way to either be feminine or masculine sitting in front of a computer all day. Just sort of as as an example.
Yeah, no, I think so. It's not only the ease of life, but also, fewer interactions maybe with humans, but not not having to, I guess, deal with people as much, but also deal with the realities of life. I mean, life can still be hard today. Let's not take it away. Many people endure, terrible things, but it's obviously much easier than prior ages. And I think that may actually explain why, modern people can differ. People who have been through certain things, act a different way. Who've faced trials in life, they probably are, not as soft. I would like to hope, but
but if you dropped my family into a subsistence farmer life, and we had no idea how to divvy up the tasks, I think it would soon become apparent that I'm the one that should be pushing the hand plow through the soil, and my wife should be the one maybe preparing the food and mending clothes and things in the home, or maybe planting seeds in seeds. So it's even just the division of labor, all the labor that we do, it's not physically differentiated for most people anymore like it was. I mean, you still have people, there's not like a lot of female shipbuilding welders or whatever. I'm trying to think of a job that's still going on today.
Coal miners, or
oil rig operators,
sailors, things like that.
Right, like where there's still some differentiation between masculine and feminine work, but those jobs are a fraction of our society now rather than most of it.
That's why most of the jobs lost in COVID were to women, because women again don't do anything. They're not like all of these. Most of the jobs women have are make work jobs that just push buttons on a computer. They don't do very much, right, in the physical world. I mean, it's fine. Like, they're a receptionist at the hospital. Maybe they're a nurse. Nurses actually do some things, although mostly in these days it's just dancing on TikTok. But like a lot of women jobs are just these office manager jobs, which is fine, but they're not really overly important in the grand scheme of things. And we discovered that because we can just say, oh, don't go to work for a year, and then nothing bad happens. Like, we don't lose anything.
Feminism would not have been possible in a prior age. I think that's and I get into that a little bit in the first chapters. There have been things that have led up to feminism, in the modern day, and technology is a big part of it. Even the fact that women can prevent children, through modern birth control. And so, there's just been all of these changes where women can go do similar things to men, because like you said, if a man's just sitting behind a computer, a woman can do that too. But there are still a lot of positions that mostly men do and women don't like to go into. And so, we, as strong as and influential as feminism is, there's still, we still have nature, and people still are fighting against nature.
Well, and Smokestack talks about there's not a way to be a woman online anymore, like gendered online. But like, I was thinking, no, there is. It's like OnlyFans. It's like doing porn. Like, that's what women are driven to online, is just to be porn stars, which is very unfortunate. But it's also why I think so many women, like, it's a self loop. Like, this is why I think a lot of women now these days identify as bisexual, because they don't really want to be prostitutes, and they don't want to be in a hookup culture where they get one night stands all the time. But that's what they've been forced into through feminism, and they sell it as empowerment somehow. And then they develop this hatred for men because they're being used and thrown away by so many men. Then they think, I don't actually like men, so I must be bi, but I'm still physically attracted to men. But they get confused in their head because they have this deep hatred of men, despite also being physically attracted to them, because they've been abused by so many. Like it's a quote from your book: women are left vulnerable, and they are being used sexually rather than committed to in marriage. And that's what feminism has given us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a distortion of both, men and women, masculinity and femininity. And so it just ends up in this messy, chaotic situation. I think we're seeing that play out, like, as you just, described.
Yeah, because it's like that's the only way to be the only way to be a woman online these days is really to be, well, you can be a shrill journalist, right? So, and then isn't it weird how they always like all of their stances always reinforce stereotypes? It's like the only thing that they just, the main purpose of women on like Twitter is to like nag men. That's just what they do.
Well, yeah, it's like feminism destroyed all the great things about women and left and the only thing left is whores and shrews on scolding you on Twitter about your political positions or whatever.
Yeah, like all the normal women that have not been affected are on Facebook just posting pictures about their kids or whatever. They don't do anything other than that, because what is there to do on the internet for a lady other than Facebook and watch YouTube videos of like,
right.
Good
Right.
morning or whatever.
But you're not going to get famous. You're not going to get internet famous doing that. Posting pictures of your kids. So
there are some women on Twitter and I think maybe some other apps where they can get some fame and make some money, promoting motherhood and cooking or things like that. So there's some stuff out there, but yeah, in general, I mean, motherhood's been so denigrated that women end up deviating from God's design, and so it's sad.
You're right. There is a wonderful. It's a countercultural online movement of traditional femininity and homemaking and child rearing and all that kind of stuff, and a lot
trad wives, right?
That's right. Trad in their little blue print dresses and stuff. No, it's out there, and like our families are their audience, and thank God they're out there doing what they're doing. I think it's great. So lest we sound like a woman hating podcast.
Well, it's okay to be a woman hating podcast. There needs to be a few more of those. That's a very small niche. There's not a lot of those out there right now. We could fill.
Maybe.
How do we?
Zach has now figured out our hyperbolic presentation style by this point.
Yeah. So okay. So how do we change course? What are some things we could do to correct, to turn the ship around? Because I think politically the solutions are a lot more complicated. Like politics is sort of so broken that people are like, just vote for the thing. And it's like, even getting a person in there to be voted on that is not a psychopath is near to impossible.
Our interests are not on the ballot and won't be.
Right. Yeah, I mean there are some political some policies and the like that could be implemented. I haven't given it too much thought, but part of the reason is I don't see anyone up there who would implement them, and so I'm not sure it matters that much at this point. And so I do think like my book focuses more on what we can do at the individual and family level, the church level as well. So I don't get as much into the politics, other than to say, in the first chapter that the politics are pretty screwed up. So, I mean, my book focuses on after the first chapter focuses on scripture and, what does the Bible teach about God's design for men and women, for the family, for the church, and even society at large. But I think it has to start with teaching people. It starts with ourselves. We need to think rightly about these things. We have to train our children in these things, try to convince other family members of God's design. And then, but a lot of it has to do with the church too. And so my book is geared towards the church. And if I can reach pastors who often shy away from a lot of the biblical texts on gender roles and marriage, even, like something like Ephesians 5, about wives submitting to their husbands loving their wives. Yeah.
Or how many pastors get up there and repeat what Paul says, where women are to be silent?
Yeah.
It doesn't happen very often.
I have a whole chapter on that, 1 Corinthians 14, 34 and 35. And that passage is like never preached on. And if you
really needs to be applied to Beth Moore, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
If she could just be thrown into a hole with her mouth taped up. we would all be better off. But listening to women talk about Beth Moore my whole life, it's like just.
What's funny about Beth Moore is she's gotten more aggressive in recent years as far as pushing feminism. You know, she used to, I think, try to act like, oh, she's just a teacher for women, and now she kind of acts like she's a pastor. And so she's getting some pushback. Obviously, John MacArthur told her to go home, and that created a whole fuss. But yeah, nobody's gonna read 1 Corinthians 14 to her. They should.
Well, MacArthur's right, and that path that she's taken it's a one-way street. It only goes to one place, and we've over the career of Beth Moore, we've seen where it goes, and that's why her audience is falling away in real like Reformed evangelical. That audience is abandoned her because I think it's now obvious where this has come from and where it's going for her. And she is like her own little pastorate. Yeah. So,
Zach, you talk about how about Roe v. Wade and abortion in here. How does feminism lead? Does feminism lead necessarily to having to kill babies?
Man, that's a good question. I don't know if it necessarily leads to it, but it certainly makes sense why, right? Their motives, which is that feminism is really based on women working outside the home. So feminism pushes women outside the home to take on careers like men. And if they have babies, then that gets in the way. And so gets in the way of careers. And so women today are choosing careers over babies. And so how do you prevent babies? Well, they try to use birth control, but it doesn't always work. It's not 100% effective, or, they don't use it properly or enough or whatever. And so women still have babies. And then what's the only option for them? Well, it's you either have the baby and take care of it like you should, or you can kill it. And that's what feminism today has advocated. I mean, it's really twisted, and it'd be hard to understand how anyone could justify abortion other than having, these higher priorities of women, being able to live a so-called fulfilling life, without children, which I don't think is happening. But yeah, I think that's the connection there, is children get in the way of careers.
Isn't it fascinating too how they'll talk out of both sides of their mouth and be like, well, single mothers are just as good as a two-parent family, or they're just as capable. Like, all families are equal, but also maybe the baby should be killed because it would be better. Right. Like, they can't decide, like, are single mothers just as good as having a dad, or should we just murder the kid?
Both. Yeah, it's twisted, man.
It's everything is both sides of their mouth. And but that's how women talk anyway. It's just in an emotive way. And so it's just like whatever their emotions are saying at the moment, they just say that. And if it's a self-contradiction, I'm not trying to hate on women unnecessarily here. I think women know that they are irrational, and they need someone to point it out to them occasionally.
It's sort of like the self-canceling two-part objection of Philip K. Dick. Are you familiar with this?
No.
So in I think it's in the Veilist trilogy, the main character is having an argument with this. It's funny because the character he's arguing with is this kind of feminist, atheist feminist shrew, and he's the main character is arguing for the existence of God, and the feminist character comes out with this thing. She says, well, science proves that God doesn't exist, and anyway, he's a jerk. So it's like it's like, which is it? Is he a jerk or does he not exist? So it's what you were saying there about single mothers, or should we kill the baby? I think it's along those irrational lines where it's not really it's a self-canceling argument, but they use it anyway because they're not trying to make a rational claim, and it really.
Yeah, and a lot of. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, in both cases, though, I do think they don't value the child. So even in the case
Yeah.
of a single mother, it's focused on the mother. And I think that's really the key here is, our society hates children. They absolutely despise children. They see children as a burden, and they get in the way of more important things. And so that's something I discussed in the last chapter of the book is, Christianity values not only men and women, but children, and has a high place for children. Children are very important. God loves children. And, we should have a lot of them and take care of them and raise them well. And, a modern feminist society is very anti-children. And so it's really messed up. I mean, the most innocent people in our society are children. And yet, people are murdering them in droves.
Well, I think the modern sort of derangement and really just the corruption of the human heart, people that are in these positions at root, they hate themselves and they hate everybody else too. And so if you hate yourself and you hate humanity, what purposes could a child serve? Like why even let a child live? And the answers to that are either to glorify yourself, to make yourself look like this wonderful person, with your little pet, or just, no, I don't, this serves me no purpose, so I'm going to kill it. And for a self-hating individual, the use of a child really falls into this kind of sad options.
They also hate, this is the thing, they also usually hate the person that impregnated them.
Yeah.
Like, because this is the hookup culture, and like I was talking about the OnlyFans, like this feeds abortion so much because the women are like, well, if we have to live in this world where to get by and to find a mate, I have to have sex with 20 men. If I get pregnant by one of those guys, I don't want to keep his baby. Like, I don't love him. We're just doing this because this is what the men are demanding of us. Right. And when women are constantly getting impregnated by men they don't love, they sort of hate the child.
I can buy that.
Because they hate the man that this is why they equate everything with rape these days, because women have an instinctual need to want to be cared for by the person that impregnated them. And then when they don't, and that isn't expected, they have a lot of justifiable hatred that they then channel into other things.
Yeah, there's definitely this detachment from sex and fertility. I mean, sex and marriage, but also, babies. It does produce children, as I like to point out to the pro-abortion people, and that you can just prevent pregnancy quite easily. But that's, not popular to say. And the sad thing in all of it is women are trading their position of power. Women actually have a lot of power. But women throw that away when they live promiscuously. And they, then they, the men just use them. I mean, that's something I discuss in there is instead of a man seeking a woman to marry and commit to, he just uses her. And part of the problem is when women do this in large enough numbers, it actually makes it hard for women to do otherwise, which is why I think, at least outside of the church, it's hard to find women who are, trying to just commit to one man in marriage.
Indeed.
Yeah, the force of public. It's really hard to live in an opposite way to everybody else. So it's very difficult, and especially for ladies.
Zach, I have kind of a culture building question that's going to connect to what you just said. Tell me about the role of the church in creating an environment where young people can meet each other and get married without taking all the artillery fire of the world's view of relationships, hookup culture, etc.
Yeah, I think the church should be offering an alternative to the chaos of the secular culture, and that the church should be teaching on these things. They don't do it enough, which is why I wrote this book. But the church is a social institution. It's a place where people meet. And I met my wife at church. I mean, I think that's true for a lot of Christians.
Mm-hmm.
and or religious groups or college ministries, things like that. And so I think the church should be providing an alternative there, but that's going to require that we teach against, promiscuity and teach in favor of God's design for monogamy and faithfulness, and even gender roles and having kids. And so I think the church has a massive role here. And I think that's really, if we're going to talk about, turning course in our society, it has to, the church has to play an important role there.
And I think we're both Reformed Presbyterian background, and it's my opinion that Reformed Presbyterian churches, in sort of, I guess, a cultural, maybe a cultural deficit in not wanting to get into a bunch of quote unquote programs, and we've left some points on the table, we've left some cash on the table where we could be doing a little bit more to provide a social context for young people to meet and get married. And I just think about a lot of young people I know that are having trouble finding a mate because our churches aren't creating culture throughout the week, creating community, creating society for our young people to live in, not just between certain hours during worship on Sunday, but all the time. And me personally, I think that Reformed Protestant churches can do a lot more in creating that. And if a young person is in a church where they go to church and they go there for worship and they go home and they're not meeting anybody there, there's no prospects there, what does somebody like that do in that position do? How can they look around and find that context? Or what does a church that's providing that look like to you, Zach? What are some of the things that they do well?
Yeah, I think this is a challenging thing for churches. It depends on the church. The bigger churches, it can be hard to just meet people in general.
Yeah.
So you probably need a young singles ministry, and some of them have that, though that can present challenges of its own.
Yeah.
The smaller churches, it should be a little easier to meet people. And so I think, they can just have small groups and events. And sometimes churches don't have enough of these things. They just have Sunday morning and then people don't come to anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, even if it's just small groups or a Wednesday night, I've always enjoyed when churches have Wednesday night supper and they'll have food and then, maybe some teaching or something after. That's a great way to meet people, not just, potential spouse, but even just build community in the church.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the big problem here is that the church is failing to build up the type of people that make good spouses, whether husband or wife. And a lot of that has to do with just not teaching on these things, because people are even Christians are so influenced by the culture that, we'll take women, for example, because this is, I think, probably the bigger problem is the women are so career focused that they essentially are feminists in behavior, and they're not looking to have children. Usually a Christian woman wants to have children at some point, but they often are still so focused on a career or school that they're not looking to get married right now. And then by the time they realize they should get married, it's often too late, and or it can be even harder to find someone. And so I just think that's part of the problem is, we don't have enough people that are marriage minded. And, even it's true for like Christian colleges and the like. Those aren't necessarily good places to meet a spouse. Sadly, They should be.
Yeah.
There should be hundreds of, potential spouses, but a lot of times there's not a lot that are a good fit if you're looking to, settle down and have kids.
Well, you talked about being.
Let me throw this out there.
Go ahead.
What about, and this sounds a little weird, but what about arranged marriages. And I don't mean like the Hindu bit. I mean, like, shouldn't parents be a bit more involved in their kids' spousal choices? Like, the idea that you're like 22 and you know what to look for in a mate is sort of ridiculous. Like, you're a dumb person at 22. Like, I met my wife at like 19 and it worked out, but that was largely just chance. Like, who knows? Like, if you're just attracted to someone you meet at a party and you click for some reason, that doesn't mean that you're fit to marry the person or that they're going to be like, you know what I mean? Like, I think used to parents would have a lot more input in, like, you know, that the whole idea of like the guy had to go and get the blessing from the father, right, to marry his daughter. That was like a version of like parental input into the spousal choice of their children. And then that's just sort of gone away. And we just leave it all up to these drugged up people in their 20s to try and figure out what to do. And then they don't make good choices. It's like they're barely like 6 years ago they were 12 or whatever.
You know? I absolutely agree there. I think parents should have a role in the marriage of their children and choosing a spouse. I think there's different ways to do it. I don't think the Bible mandates a particular practice.
Right.
So I don't want to like condemn modern dating entirely, though I think in general it's pretty awful and it's not very conducive towards marriage. You know, there's more of a Christian way to date, I think, but ideally the parents should be involved in some regard, especially the father. And I think the father has an important role in protecting his children, particularly his daughters. And so I think that's really what should be happening is if the father is protecting his daughters, you know, from bad suitors or just men who are, you know, just wanting to sleep with them and not actually marry them, that would go a long way. And so really, I mean, I do address this some as fathers have totally abdicated the responsibility in this regard.
Yep.
And, you know, so some people, there is a movement for like Christian courtship, which is, it's not arranged marriage, but it's more you have to go through the father. You know, he has to give permission to come over and meet the daughter, ideally if she's living with her parents, and certainly permission to marry. But, you know, I think that's often too late in the game, you know, as they've been dating for 6 months or years or whatever. And then, oh, hey, by the way, can I marry your daughter? No, I don't like you. I mean, so that just doesn't happen, you know? So it's like a remnant of an older practice. The whole
mothers are very good at choosing wives for their sons too. Like this whole idea that like a lot of the times people don't get along with their mother-in-law because the mother-in-law is like, if you'd have just asked me, I could have done so much better. And they're usually right. People like that, but it's like parents sort of know the personality of their child, and then they've been married and they know what works and what doesn't, and then they look at it and say, oh, this is going to be a problem when they're with someone, you know, and they're usually often it's like people choosing their own spouse 100% with no input from their parents is like abysmal. It's more than 50% divorce rate because they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah,
you know?
Why would you throw off the wisdom of you know, prior generations and people older than yourself? I mean, we shouldn't do that for anything, let alone one of the most important decisions you make in life, which is whom you marry. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's crazy if you don't have the input of your family. Now, there are bad parents out there who, you know, maybe you're a Christian and your parents aren't or something, you know, so you might have to not totally follow what they say, but you know, when I met my wife, what did I do? I wanted her to, you know, meet my family. I wanted to see what they thought, you know, and I think that's how it should be.
Yeah.
Right on. Amen.
So, is there any last things you wanted to say before we, any last inputs? Everyone buy his book, Traditional Masculine Christianity. Very good.
Yeah. Where can we find your work, Zach?
Yeah, so the best place to buy the book is on Amazon. I have a couple other books as well. You can find my writings online at teachdiligently.com, which you mentioned. That's a Christian education website. It has a lot of resources on there. I write on there occasionally. And I also have knowing-scripture.com, and that's a Bible website where I write articles on Scripture. I try to tackle hard questions. And that's actually kind of, I think, over the years, what got me into this book is I started writing some things on gender roles and was doing some book reviews, and it just kind of got me going. Feminism's always been an area of interest just because it's so in your face, and it seems like, problem we have to address. And so, I hope people find this book helpful. It's, it's certainly controversial, but in another sense, it shouldn't be. It is just kind of the traditional position on male and female, traditional Christian position. But in our society, that's controversial, even in a lot of these so-called conservative churches. So, I hope people like the book, or at least feel challenged by it.
I'm really looking forward to reading it. I had one other question before you go. Are there any groups, churches, communities in Western Christendom right now that you feel are setting a good example of family life and roles and creating a biblical family culture and all those things that you would say, okay, those people are doing it right. We need to watch what they're doing and maybe take notes on these topics?
Yeah, there's one community in particular that comes to mind, and that's Doug Wilson. He's a pastor in Idaho. Yep. And he has a church there. They're part of the CREC, mm-hmm. which is a smaller denomination. I'm part of the PCA, Presbyterian Church in America, and our denomination is kind of a mess right now. But the CREC has, I'm sure, its own issues, but it's pretty conservative. And Wilson has a lot of great books. I mentioned one at the end of my book called Father Hunger. That's an excellent book. He has other great books like Reforming Marriage. A lot of times they're short and cheap. And so those are a great, kind of practical approach to some of these issues. My book is somewhat practical, but also gets a lot into the text of the Bible. And so it can be a little more, a little harder to read. I mean, I try to make it easy to read, but it can be a little technical in some places. But Wilson is great, and I wish we had more like him. There's a guy, Vodi Balkum. He writes on some of these issues. Mm-hmm. All these guys are, they discuss marriage. I mean, they're going to be big on male headship. They're going to be opposed to public education, so they're big on homeschooling, or at least Christian education in general. Wilson is huge in the Christian education world. Yep. He's controversial. Some people don't like him, but that's just going to come with the territory, I think. And but I strongly recommend his work. Yeah, we're Wilson fans over here at Casa del Smokestack also, so that's cool. Well, Zach, it's been great having you on the show, man. I really appreciate you coming in and sharing your work with us and talking with us. Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thanks for working through our connection issues also. One day I will figure out how to use computers.
Hey, you're only a mad scientist, Yeah.
I know.
Lattice theory, shock waves, hydrodynamics, astrophysics, weather control, atomic energy, computer technology, and theory of automata, game theory, rings of operators, lattice theory, shock waves, hydrodynamics, astrophysics, weather control.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Atomic energy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Computer technology.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Theory of automata.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.